The United States is facing a debt time bomb. What with President-elect Barack Obama and congressional Democrats now considering a massive spending package aimed at pulling the nation out of the recession, the national debt is projected to jump by as much as $2 trillion or more this year. An unprecedented increase that could test the world's appetite for financing U.S. government spending. For now, investors are frantically stuffing money into the relative safety of the U.S. Treasury, which has come to serve as the world's mattress in troubled times. Interest rates on Treasury bills have dropped to historic lows, with some short-term investors literally giving the government money for free. But approximately 40% of the debt held by private investors will mature in a year or less, according to Treasury officials. And when those loans do or come due, the Treasury will have to borrow more money just to repay them, even as it launches perhaps the most aggressive expansion of U.S. debt in modern history. And what with the government planning to roll over its short-term loans into more stable long-term securities. Economic experts say investors are likely to demand a greater return on their money. They're going to want a higher interest rate, burdening taxpayers with huge new interest payments for many years to come. Who is going to pay the national debt back? Who is going to pay all this money back? And how and when? Is this some great big huge burden that they're putting on the little kids, the generations to come? How is all this going to work? Always borrowing more money. Some economists also worry that foreign investors, the largest U.S. creditors, may prove unable to absorb the skyrocketing debt, undermining confidence in the United States as the bedrock of the global financial system. That's a very real possibility that's coming. Even while the current market for treasuries is booming, it's unclear whether demand for debt can be sustained. Chief economist at Wrightson ICAP, which analyzes treasury financing trends. He said, "There's a time bomb in there somewhere." Yes, a time bomb. But we don't know exactly where on the calendar it's planted. In other words, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Yes, this is coming too. The government's hunger for cash began growing exponentially as the nation slipped into recession in the wake of a housing foreclosure crisis over a year ago. Washington has since approved $168 billion in spending to stimulate economic activity, $700 billion to prevent the collapse of the U.S. financial system, and multi-billion-dollar bailouts for a variety of financial institutions, including insurance giant American International Group and mortgage financiers Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But despite those actions, the economic outlook has continued to darken. It's still getting worse. Perhaps we can't spend our way out of this one. Maybe there's something else that's going on here that's bigger than all this. That is a real possibility. Also, and now Obama and congressional Democrats are debating as much as $850 billion more, yes more, in new federal spending and tax cuts to create or preserve jobs and slow the grim upward march of unemployment, which stood in November at 6.7% and rising rapidly. Again, there's something bigger going on here. Congress is not planning to raise taxes or cut spending to cover the cost of those programs, because economists say doing so would slow down the economy even further. So that means the government has to borrow more money, always borrowing more money. Well, who's going to pay this back, I say again, and when, and how? If the economy is always getting worse. Some of the borrowing was done during the fiscal year that ended in September, when the Treasury added nearly $720 billion to the national debt, but the big borrowing binge will come during the current fiscal year, upcoming, when the cost of the bailouts, plus another stimulus package combined with slowing tax revenues will force the government to increase the debt by as much as $2 trillion or more to finance its obligations. That's if everything goes as planned, but you know how that goes. As of yesterday, the national debt stood at approximately $10.7 trillion, of which approximately $4 trillion is owed to other government institutions such as the Social Security Trust Fund. Debt held by private investors totals nearly $6.4 trillion, or a little over 40% of gross domestic product. And according to the most recent figures, foreign investors hold approximately $3 trillion in U.S. debt at the end of October. China, which in October replaced Japan as the United States' largest creditor, has increased its holdings by 42% over the past year alone. Britain and other countries, banking countries, more than doubled their holdings. Economists from across the political spectrum have endorsed the idea of going ever deeper into debt to combat what many call the most dangerous economic conditions since the Great Depression. The United States is in relatively good financial shape so far compared with other industrial nations such as Japan, with a public debt equaled 182% of GDP in 2007, or Germany, where the debt was 65% of GDP. Even a $2 trillion increase would push a U.S. debt to approximately 53% of the overall economy. Still, some economists are concerned that the deepening global recession, yes deepening, will force some of the largest U.S. creditors to divert cash to domestic needs, such as investing in their own banks and economies. Even if demand for U.S. debt keeps pace with supply, investors are likely to demand higher interest rates. These economists say, driving up debt service payments, which last year stood at $250 billion. When you accumulate this amount of debt that we're moving into, it's not a given that our foreign friends are going to continue on the path they've been on. Perhaps there really is no such thing as unlimited credit. There's going to come a time when we can't even pay the interest on the money we've already borrowed, and that's called default or bankruptcy. Yes, these are more signs of what's going on. Signs of the times. And the economic crisis is connected to all other things that are going on in the world at the same time. The political, the social, the climate change, everything is connected. And, in turn, all these things are connected to the end times transition days. The transition is ongoing.